Welcome to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast, brought to you by Stratum. I'm your host, Griffin Hamilton. This is the show where I interview industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights into modern-day facilities management. From hospitality to commercial real estate and everything in between, we'll learn what it really takes to succeed as a facilities manager.
Welcome to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast. Today, the guest is Taz Sutherland. Taz, how you doing, man?
I'm well, Griffin. How are you, sir?
Doing well. I know we've tried this a couple times and hoping this is going to work, but thanks for bearing with me.
One of these, if it doesn't work this time, we'll just have to meet up next time I'm in your neck of the woods, right? We'll do it at a Starbucks or something. So
yeah, we'll be doing the FaceTime streaming on our phones or something, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll get it for sure.
Well, hey, I know that we've talked a lot, but for the sake of the folks who don't know who you are, why don't you give a little bit of a background on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, love to. So currently I'm a senior facilities manager for Walmart. I specialize, the area that I'm in is the facilities equipment program. So Walmart's super huge, right? As you can imagine. So when you get in the FM world, you're catered to a select trade set, right? And you're allowed to move around, right? But you end up, if you're like me, you end up becoming sort of a specialist in that field, right? So I've got a team of about 6 to 8 people right now that manage all of the programs, right? So we build the programs for equipment that says, this is what it is. This is what it does in your store. This is how the technicians need to see it, view it, PM it, look at it, sort of that, all that sort of thing. So my expertise is refrigeration and food equipment. But with me being a senior manager, I'm also overseeing pharmacy equipment, back of house rolling racks and that sort of thing, paint equipment. Belted checkouts is another one, right? Like people don't realize that you got 30 registers at a Walmart. Those belted checkouts, they cause, over 5,000 units. There's a lot to deal with there. So, but that's, my daily is sort of managing national vendors, managing sort of the programs. People have questions. They're like, hey, I don't know what this machine does or who fixes it or that sort of thing. We answer those kind of questions. But then we're definitely evolving into this sort of data heavy analytics piece where we're saying, okay, we have, X thousand of these machines, their life according to the industry is this long, but we're only seeing this long, right? So we have to solve for that problem. Sometimes it's a matter of we're Walmart and we just overuse the equipment. Sometimes it's a matter of training. Sometimes it's a matter of we really shouldn't have this equipment in our stores. It's not like heavy duty enough for our big of a footprint, right? So we've ran into that a bunch where it's a perfectly fine machine. And if you're running a 10,000, 15,000 square foot retail space, that machine will last you 10, 15 years. You put it in a 250,000 square foot retail space, now it lasts 2, right? So that's kind of it's kind of me in a nutshell. That's what we're looking for, right? You hear an FM, you hear the old man method machine kind of ideology where you have to solve for which one of the 3 is causing the issue. That's what we do, right? We find those issues, that data, that root cause analysis. And of course, we're our home office operators, right? We're not They love to make that distinction. We're not in the Walmart world. When you say operator, that's someone who's actually in a store, right? Mm-hmm. So we're sort of overhead from that standpoint. So that's when we go to them and go, hey, we've noticed this issue. It points to training. So we are offering this. You can't come, right? You don't want to walk into them and just be like, hey, you're screwing all this up. So that's my sort of political game that I play all day long. I present data. I present a strong case for moving from this method to this method to gain us this much life out of a machine or this much of savings and that sort of thing. So that's sort of in fact, that's pretty much been my entire career. I've just, pick a year, I'll tell you which equipment I was focused on that year, right? So,
yeah, and you have a very unique perspective there with how much different types of equipment that you've dealt with, but at the same time, you alluded to 5,000 units, and we're going to dive into the data component here in a bit, but it's really interesting where something that would make a very small difference on its own, right? One unique case of, 4% difference, right? But if you extrapolate that across 5,000 units, that is potentially millions of dollars that could be saved there. So you're looking for very small details and fine tuning the process to just the nth degree there to make that big of a difference.
Yep. Yeah. It's, and of course that's the beauty of the job, right? Is you do have to deal with the stress of that much of a volume, but yeah, sometimes you find the tiniest of tweaks and you get to the end of the year and you're like, well, that was 7 million and change back. Right. And there's companies that are like, you saved 7 million. How did you even, we only operate at 10. How did you pull that off? Right. I'm like, you got to remember, 5,000 units. So yeah, my team, we have 139 individual pieces of equipment that we manage in that space. Right. So forklifts is an example, right? So forklifts has its own like powerlifting equipment sort of, vertical. Right. And people are like, oh, okay. So forklifts. And I'm like, yep. So here's the problem with forklifts. Right. That's basically a car that lifts heavy things, right? So it has a transmission and it has wheels and brakes and horns and, and so then you use that analogy with people. You're like, so you bought a brand new car for $28,000 and the kid down the street just started working for him. Do you give him the keys? No, no way. Well, we do. I mean, it's, that's our new employee, and he just did the online test, so he's certified to drive that truck around. Sometimes that's not a good thing. I will tell you though, and you probably know this as well though, right? It's typically the tenured forklift drivers that will make more of the mistakes, right? The bigger mistakes, right? So the new drivers will scrape paint off of stuff all day long, but it's those folks that have been driving it for a minute and they're like, oh, I can make that turn. And then, they don't. And, those are the ones that are terrible, right?
Disaster strikes. Yeah. Well, Taz, I know we were talking about this a bit earlier, but this is going to be the first episode of the theme of the maturation of facilities organization. And like I said earlier, you've got a very unique perspective dealing with different areas within Walmart, going from restaurant cooking equipment down to the actual equipment on the floor. So really wanted to get your perspective on your view on each individual organization as they've developed and gone from reactive to implementing a standardized preventative maintenance plan to then, to your point earlier, getting more in depth with data collection and using that to make strategic decisions. So I'm excited to begin this theme and start it out with you and your interesting background here. So with that, I'll toss it over to you as far as your experience establishing that type of program where you've seen an organization or a group of FMs or technicians going out and just in time repairs, or going out and, okay, this is emergency, this is breaking, and I'm all over the place, kind of going crazy. Going from that into establishing, like I said, a PM process, what does that typically look like?
So it looks at like initially, right? Everybody's like, you can do this and this, you can start a PM, a proactive type role, and you can save lots of money. And people are like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And you hear the finance guys, right? They're like, it pencils, and yeah, you're right. The problem is that execution, right? So that's what, that's one of the things we do in Walmart, right? Like if I present an idea, like you have to remember how big Walmart is. So you have, like, they warn you all the time when you get into senior leadership, if you present an idea, you need to be ready to run with it. Because somebody in that room is going to call you on it, right? So I've several times presented ideas and ran with programs, but ideally I was able to, I had the backing, right? Like here's the program, here's the money we're going to save. And somebody in the room goes, all right, you bet your badge on the program, right? Yeah. Like you hear that in corporate, right? Like, you bet your badge on that. And I'm like, yeah, I'll bet the badge on this one. Right. And so you go running with this program, and in smaller units, you have the advantage of like that pause moment where you can go, okay, we've discovered across these 100 units that this is happening. So we're going to pause for a month and then straighten that out and then jump back into it. Nope. in Walmart, you get a flat tire on the interstate, you can't pull off. You have to maintain 85 miles an hour, which is 10 over the speed limit. So you have to figure out how to change a tire on the interstate at 85 miles an hour. And that's the trick of it all, right? So that's when a facilities professional like myself comes into play very heavily, right? Because I have to start so you have to go from a just run out and fix it till you break it to a fully functioning proactive maintenance. There are, in our case, years of the stopgap maneuvers, right? So, you start out with, inspections and the PM runs where you run in with known pieces that wear, right? Door gaskets and seals and these sort of things. And you're like, look, I'm shipping boxes of these things to your technicians. Just trade them out, right? And you'll have technicians sometimes are like, hey, there's some life in this gasket. I'm like, don't care. I don't care right now. I will care down the road when this thing's mature. I'm going to be like, we need to figure out how to get 12 months out of our 12-month gasket instead of 10-month, right? Like that's when you get into that linear thing or that granular level. That's down the road right now. Right now, you'll find 80% of, if you don't have any PM, you'll find 80-90% of your machines haven't, like nobody's even like, they'll break the seal on the factory, the factory seal, right? And they'll open it up. And I mean, you'll find like in food equipment, like it's the worst, right? Because you have pest management to deal with in that one, right? So you'll have grease in there and they're like, oh, hey, look, guess what? There's roaches in there, right? So now that's a whole nother problem. You can't just put that oven back into service now, right?
Okay.
Like there's an infestation. And so there's all these levels that you're going to find on a PM. And that's the thing for you to get to mature level. You have to be prepared to deal with, we call it a repair PM. So we send out PMs and then we have a separate ticket called a repair PM, or it's a repair found during the PM, right? So they go out there with the idea that I'm going to change the filter, 2 belts, door gasket, and the door catch that always gets worn out because everybody's just slamming that door, right? So you go out kind of with that basic mindset, right? It's almost the oil change on your car. And then the guy comes in and goes, hey, did you know your transmission's leaking?
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole nother problem, right? You got to deal with it. You don't have to, well, technically you don't have to deal with it, right? But we all know what happens when you don't deal with it. So that's what you have to be prepared, right? So you have to be prepared with those answers, right? So the first thing you tell your technicians as they're going out, because you'll have in-house technicians in some cases, you'll have third-party technicians in some cases. There are cases where I've had a third-party aggregate who's called a third party, right? So you got a third-party, and I don't know. That's always the funny joke we make. Is that a sixth party or is that a fourth party? How does that work, right? Like how does that work? But those are the kind of things that, someone like me, I've dealt with them. I've tripped on those hurdles, and I'm pretty open about sharing that stuff online. And people ask me all the time, they're like, you talk a lot about, Walmart. And I'm like, I do, but I'm not out there sharing Walmart's, secrets, right? These are FM problems that I'm out there talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have the luxury in the FM world of having this super huge platform that I've seen just about everything happen to. And so I oftentimes offer that information up as a benefit, right? We were talking before we jumped on here about, PMs to plumbing systems is a great example. People are like, well, how do you PM a plumbing system? And I'm like, it's not rocket surgery, right? Like you get somebody out there that knows what they're doing, and they can stand there and they go, look, your flush is bad over here. You got low flow here. They know how to pop clean outs and kind of, it's not super hard, but you do need, like, you can't just, somebody handy with a screwdriver can't just run out there and go, yeah, sounds normal, right? So those are all those kind of questions you got to deal with. I've seen plumbing PMs where, they're like, hey, we can't get the flow on this store at all, right? Like you have really super slow flow out to the city, right? So you have to call the city and they'll run a camera up the back end and we'll find, how it is. It's plumbing, right? So there's a mass somewhere and hundreds of feet of pipe, and you finally solve this, right? And you're out $20,000. But I can tell you right now, I have seen when they don't do that, if you have that backing up onto your sales floor, we typically have a single floor unit, right? And it's a big concrete pad, right? So you know what that means, right? So now it's spreading across the store. There's no you can go back to our hardware section. We have no plungers back there that will help you in that situation, period, right? And so then you like bathrooms get shut down, and so then you're renting like a vent trailer type. People are like, get some porta potties out there, and I'm like, you can't do that. Like, you can't just drop porta potties. That's not good enough. We're Walmart. Like, what about ADA? And they're like, well, what about ADA? And I'm like, someone with a disability who's wheelchair bound can't just get into a normal, like, you can't, like, you have to think about that. And then I've had it happen where lines freeze and bust and shut down the back half of a store, right? So now you have the event trailer with the heated, right, portable restrooms, and people are like, yeah, get that out there. I'm like, that's $2,800 a day for one of those. And we're Walmart, right? So one of those covers basically you have two, right? You have there's three now, right? So you have the male, female, and then you have like the family one that's slightly bigger, ADA kind of compliant one. Those are $2,800, like $3,800 a day just to have them rented, right? It costs you like, stupid. It's like $5,000 to mobilize them. And then you have to pay for whatever you used on the back end, right? No pun intended, but it gets crazy quick. And so it's funny, in the 20 years I've been doing this, the amount of people that will argue with me and they're like, I don't see the value in your PMs. And so in our area, we're gonna stop that, because that's 200,000 we can gain back every year. And I'm like, that's going to end badly for you. And they're like, no, we don't think so, right? And I've had this conversation so many times, because they'll stop it, and I'm like, that's a bad idea. It's a really bad idea. Like, I'm making all the noisy exits I can, right? And 3 months down the road, they're like, see, nothing's happened. And I'm like, just wait, like, it's gonna get bad. And then 6 months in, whenever it hits, right, at some point, that other shoe drops. And then they're like, how do we fix this? And I'm like, well, now it's going to cost you $200,000 per site. So your little savings that you got an exceeds performance eval with, you just crap the bed on that one. So it's funny, but yeah. So getting to mature, it's hard, and it's hard for, we were talking about this being like, if you're in a startup role, it's hard. Like, that extra money is just hard to part with sometimes, but there are some roles small. I see a lot of single unit restaurants. I helped the local bakery down the road open. And I told that guy from the get-go, I was like, look, don't miss these things. If you miss anything, don't miss these things. Right. And so every time somebody's had to come out for service, it's been a normal break, right? And they go right in there, and he's like, hey, guy had me up in 30 minutes. And I'm like, see, you remember you did that PM 3 months back, right? Like, all these like emergency things start to go away. Now, don't get me wrong, somebody's still going to run a forklift through a dock plate. That stuff's still going to happen, right? Customers are customers, associates. But realistically, if we were dealing with just normal wear and tear and accidental stuff, we would be a much, much smaller organization and footprint inside Walmart. And we're like outside, like the operators, the people in the stores are always the biggest group, right? But we're a pretty large group, of support specialists. So when you talk about taking that from nothing to mature, that's a huge battle, and you have to be ready for it, right? And I hate to use the words battle, but you're gonna have to fight somebody for that money. Now, down the road, they'll be singing your praises, right? This is the lady that took us from here to here. This is the guy that elevated us from this point to this point. This is the team led by this individual that, shot us over the moon. But it takes years for that to happen. And now, if you got 2 sites, I can have you straightened out in 6 months, right? Like, that's cake. But you let something go 6, 12, 18 months in an organization as large as ours, and then you are correcting stuff for 5 years after that, like every time. So I love talking to schools and hospitals about that, right? Because there's a lot of PM stuff that you can teach your associates to do. And I use the term PM for them, but it's not a PM like where they're breaking down the machine, right? It's more of a, hey, do you know if you did this once a day to this machine just once a day, right? 30 seconds once a day to this machine. I guarantee you I'll reduce at least one service call a year, right? And they're like, those service calls are like $4,000 or $5,000 every time they come out. And I'm like, so are you in it for 30 seconds a day, or do you want to just eat 5K extra a year, right? Because I can,
Right.
and so that's one of the things facilities managers have to do, right? So when you collect that data, then you have the data, right? Now it's your responsibility to educate people with it and grow that knowledge base, because there's a lot of people, I see it every day in commercial food equipment, right? They're like, hey, my grandma taught me to line the ovens with tin foil. And I'm like, so here's the deal. In your residential kitchen, in that residential stove where you have it at 500 degrees once a year for that turkey, that's fine, right? But when you have a high convection flow rate oven and you've covered all the vents and fan holes with tin foil because you don't want to put a little more elbow grease into it at the end of the day, now you're going to send me a ticket and go, I got to add 30 minutes to my cook time every single time. Yeah, because you literally you're killing the thermodynamics of the oven. And so you start explaining that to people and they're like, well, it's just easier to clean at the end of the day. And I'm like, so how long does it take you to tinfoil it? Well, it takes us about 30 minutes. And I'm like, so in 5-minute increments after each cook, if you'll just wipe the walls down and drain that, trust me, I'll give you the 30 minutes back that you tinfoil, and I'll probably give you another 30 that you have to scrub out at the end of the day, right? It's all that, chefs know that, right? What do they call that? Mise en place, that it's like clean as you go, kind of like keep your station in order kind of thing. And I try to teach that to associates, and you can teach that to forklift associates. You can teach that to floor scrubber associates. You can teach that to anybody using equipment, right? And we have a problem with people, they're at the end of their shift and they kind of put the forklift or the floor cleaner like in its little cubby and they forget to plug it in, right? And then we get a ticket that it doesn't hold a charge very long, right? Well, what happens is you stopped at 10 p.m., for example, and you didn't plug it in, right? So the morning guy comes in at 5 a.m. and he goes, oh, this isn't plugged in, and he plugs it in. And then at 6, he hits the floor with it, right? But his manager sees him hits the floor with it, and then 30 minutes later, he's heading, he's like pushing it back because the battery's dead. So he thinks a battery problem. And a tech comes out for, I mean, at the rates we're hitting now in 2021, I've seen all the rates go up. Dude, it's $500 for a guy to come out here and go, looks like you don't plug it in at night, right?
Yeah.
I could have told you that for free. I get, I mean, so when you talk about getting a program to maturity, that's your big wins. That's how you win friends in the business, right? And not just the business, for friends, right? But I mean, like, how is it win your enemies and make friends kind of thing. And, because you'll have those naysayers, right? But then when you start showing them the data, nope, look, yep. So as expected, I spent more in the first quarter because I launched the PM program, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in my first quarter compared to last year's first quarter, yep, twice as much. Okay, here we go though. Here's second quarter. I was done with the PMs, right? There's not much change. It's a little bit flat, right? But then you go into that third quarter and suddenly third quarter year over year looks a little different, right? And then at the third quarter, you come in with that second round of PMs, right? And you'll see a little spike heading into the fourth quarter, but not what you saw in the first quarter. And then in the fourth quarter, you see a dip, right? And so that's when you mature a program, like people don't understand that sometimes as well. The differences you make, you have to be prepared to deal with consequences 2 years down the road, right? So if you launch a PM program and you let it run for 2 years, I guarantee you I won't have to sell you on a PM program again, right? Like you will be sold on it. But there's so many times people are like, I haven't seen change in 6 months. We spent all this money and we're still flat. And I'm like, yes, because people are still using the equipment. Like it's still going to break. Legacy, age of fleet, all of these words we throw in there, all of these things those come into the factor, right? So you're trying to PM a 15-year-old machine. You're going to spend the PM money and another 2 in repairs. That's guaranteed. Well, how do we stop that? I'm like, stop letting units get to 15 years, right?
You're right.
If 15 years is past the useful life of that machine in your organization, toss it in, right? I use this analogy all the time with people. I'm like, I've got plenty of them. My grandpa was this way. I see plenty of them driving around. You got this 40-year-old truck, right? And the guy that's driving it drives to the Legion Hall once a week. And he drives to Walmart once a week, and he's retired and he's happy, right? So when the starter goes out on that, he heads down to AutoZone. He gets a start. He's not worried about that, right? So the useful life of that machine to him and the sort of benefit of it, like if the starter's down, he doesn't go to Walmart that day. He goes to Walmart the next day. He has all of this luxury in that. In the business world, you have to determine the point to where you're throwing parts on a machine. And trust me, back it off by 20%. You'll be so much happier in 5 years, guaranteed. Mm-hmm. Right. And people, I can't get people to do that. We're actually food equipment in our world. We like 8 years out of it. Right. So it's sort of a general, sandwich spread we put on equipment, food equipment. Right. We want at least 8 years out of the slicer, at least 8 years out of the bakery oven. We have found on our combi oven platform that we're not getting that 8 years right now. Right. We're getting closer to 5 or 6. Right. So that program only started back in 2011. So we are now entering into that, right? So I've watched the combi oven program kind of come into maturity into that first, right? We've had rotisserie ovens in there since the 90s. We've had fryers in there since the 90s, bakery ovens in there. So I have decades of data, right? This unit's better. This unit lasts longer. I can do that all day long with you, right? The combi oven's a whole new program. But one of the things that, and I wasn't around when they launched this, right? But I don't feel like somebody was there to tell them this story either, right? So we launched a new oven type into our stores, and the combi oven was put into smaller format stores to take the place of the fryer and the rotisserie oven, right? So we take the fryer and the rotisserie oven out of these stores and we put in a combi oven double stack, right? Good and bad, right? You get some of your footprint back. The combi oven can do air fry, it can do baked, it can do rotisserie style. It does all of these cool things. We have little smoker boxes, we do smoked pork tenderloins, all these cool stuff, right? What they didn't take into factor was everything being produced by the deli in their current program was by a 3-bank fryer, so 3 vats, and a double stack rotisserie oven, so 2 ovens, so technically 5 pieces of equipment, right? So you reduced it to 2, right? But you're sort of layering the same principles across that, right? So now 5-6 years in, they're like, these ovens aren't lasting as long as we expected and all this. And I'm like, because you are using them. I mean, what is that? 5 to 2? What is that? 60,
2.5 times more.
Yeah. Right. And they're like, oh, well, when we retire them at 5 years, the store has to pay that depreciation for 8 years. And I'm like, then we need to have that conversation with the comptroller, right? Like that's a whole nother, or not, is it controller, something like that? What the whatever that office group is that deals with the depreciation and taxes and all that. I am not I understand finances, but I'm telling you, if I had to sit and deal with spreadsheets of finances all day long, I'd go nuts. That's
me and you both.
yeah. I've got to see the numbers solved for something at some point. And in a corporate environment, they don't, right? You accrue, you pass over, it rolls over, it comes back, it pre-buy, it tax rates out. And I'm like, dude, I just can I get another 20 million for ovens? That's all I'm looking for.
Just a mere 20 million.
And they're like, 20 million for how long? And I'm like, I don't know, it'll be this many. And they're like, well, so what it's that whole game. But talking about a mature program, right? I watched that combi oven program now, and we're literally in talks in the last 3 months about reducing that to a 5-year depreciation cycle, right? So that, because you don't want to punish the store, right? They're just using the crap out of this oven, and of course I love these conversations always come up. They're like, well, is there a better oven out there? Is there a more robust oven out there? And I'm like, look, you can upgrade to the heaviest duty machine you want. You put 500,000 miles on it, you got your money out of it. We need to shorten that span and accept that in some things, you're not. And of course, and I love it too, right? These are the ones that are like, well, we get 12 years out of the bakery ovens. And I'm like, yes, they bake bread, right? Yep. There's no grease producing items in there. There's not they even have type 2 hoods. They don't even yeah. I mean, we bake for 4 or 5 hours a day. right? Bread only items. Yeah. You should get 20 years out of that oven, right? Like, don't talk to me about 15. We need to be talking about why we're not getting 20 out of it. You produce rotisserie chicken, air fried, splattered foods, for 9 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you're like, why can't we get 8 years out of the oven? I'm like, you just can't. You cannot, right? And then they're like, well, what's the components that fails? Can we rebuild? You get like, that's when you talk about maturity, people will come to you with all these crazy questions. Can we refurb it? Not food equipment. I mean, some food equipment, yes. But most refurbed food equipment, that unit's second life is the corner bakery, or, somebody who goes from 200 birds a day to 12, right? Because they know they can get it for an eighth of the price and maybe spend a few thousand a year in maintenance cycles, but it's not huge volume.
The scale's nowhere close to you guys.
Yeah, we have a Sam's Club in El Paso that literally is, they have won the chicken sales for, I don't know, a decade now, right? That store shoots
What's
out.
going on in El Paso?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I can tell you, because we had to figure it out, right? Like, we had to go down there and figure out what was going on with all this. But so this Sam's Club puts out just shy of 500 birds a day, right? So 500 rotisserie chickens come out of this. So they have 8 of these, like, heart rotisseries with they got the flame in the back, so it looks pretty and people can go, ooh, look at the chicken crisping, right? Like, they get all, like, it's all designed, right? It's a big show back there. And people, like, I could go on for an hour about people losing their mind over a chicken. But that's a whole other story. But so there's a lot of so El Paso's this big unique city that's kind of in the middle of nowhere, right? So if you're familiar with El Paso, if you go east, you're east into Texas, but there's nothing near you for hundreds of miles, right? If you go west, let's say northwest, you kind of get into that, Alamogordo part of New Mexico. Again, nothing there, right? If you go south, right, you're sitting on the Mexico border, right? So you're in a whole nother country, which also, conveniently enough, that particular part of Mexico is not exactly super populated either, right? And so, but you have this little hub of industry and, like, border crossing and all this kind of going on. So there's actually a ton of people there. And food trucks are a huge, huge business there, right? So these food trucks have figured out, instead of trying to maintain food equipment, right, like ovens and all this stuff, they just set up with a nice griddle and they roll down to Sam's Club, right? And they get the big chubs of the ground beef and they get some flank steaks and they get, 2 or 3 carts of rotisserie chickens, right? And so now you get your tortillas on the way out, you get some chips, you get some veggies to make your salsas and pico de gallos, and you've got a taco truck like that, right? And so they're selling chicken street tacos with rotisserie chicken. It's already cooked, it's seasoned amazing already, right? So they throw it on the griddle, warm it up a bit, and it goes in a taco, and people just line up and buy it. And then down the street, you'll see a truck that's like walk and roll, right? And so they've got, ramen or noodles or whatever, that kind of flair food, right? So again, they don't have to cook the chicken. They just shred it in a little pile, right? And they just kind of throw it in. And 500 birds a day, 7 days a week.
That's incredible.
I mean, just, and that's their average, right? Like, I'm sure Saturday and Sunday's probably, or Sunday and Monday's probably a little thin, right? But, like, on average, they're kicking 500 birds out of that thing a day. So people talk to me, they're like, have you seen programs mature? Have you seen the benefit of a PM? And I'm like, look, you want to test a PM on food equipment? Let's go to this store.
Yep. Yeah, that's example A right there.
I'll give you a result in 6 months. Like, I'll show you the money in 6 months. And that's a game we play, right? Like, you have bean counters, and their job is to, hey, we're spending X million. We want to spend X million less, make it happen, right? So they ask I don't know. You can call them stupid questions, right? Like, you always want to be mindful of people's, opinions and that kind of thing. Obviously, you don't want people thinking there's dumb questions out there, but boy, they ask some doozies sometimes, and you're like, yeah, it doesn't work that way. I see what you're thinking, but that doesn't work that way.
Well,
So
what I love that you mentioned earlier, and kind of tying it back to, I mean, obviously Walmart's a different beast, right? Like that, not many people listening are, yeah, I've got 5,000 units.
Yep.
You're one of the very rare cases where that,
Mhm.
is part of your life, right?
Yep.
But you tied it to the bakery down the street and
Yep.
the impact of PMs on a bakery, because that's something that I've heard constantly over the years is just, we're not going to do that. We're just fine. We're too small for a PM.
Yeah.
And that is something where it's fascinating for me to, I get where you're coming from. I understand that it is difficult to pay X amount of dollars on the front end, and that return, it's not going to be 3 months. It may not be 6 months. It's going to be years down the line where you have to look back. And that's a tough pill to swallow.
Mhm.
But I love how you're pushing that home of like the importance of this, without a doubt, is going to pay off both in the time and labor that it takes to repair whatever is going to occur, the investment you've made on your assets, and then just frankly, your sanity, right? Where
Yep.
you have dependable assets where your customers now aren't getting impacted. And in a restaurant space, they're the ones that, okay, if your fryer's out or your pizza oven is out and they came for that specific piece of food, right? Like they're
Yep.
not happy, you're not going to get a return customer. So
Yep.
it's very important to make that note or that point of, don't be a penny wise and a pound foolish. This is a long-term investment. And unless you want to be in business for a year or 2 years and flip it, then you got to have this program in place.
Yep. Yep. And I spin that to a lot of customers that I've helped with startups and all those. And food, we're talking about food trucks, right? Like food trucks is one that I tell them, I'm like, look, pick a Monday, right? When you know it's going to be a slow week anyway, right? And take your food truck, figure out the local food equipment company that has like a workshop area where they work on microwaves and all that other stuff that they just don't want to sit. Like there's lots of, like, I can't take a big oven out of a store and take it down the street and work on it. I just can't. But microwaves, slushy machines, all that stuff, these techs will come in with a loaner, set you up for the day, take it back to the shop. So they're not in the way of your customers, are not in your way. You're producing, you're making money, and you pull it out. Food trucks the same way, right? But it's just literally the reverse, right? Drive your kitchen up to them and go, hey, I need a PM on this, right? Somebody's going to come out and give you a quote on a PM. And here's the deal. You set up at the county fair, 10,000 people are going to be there, and your Vulcan griddle doesn't fire up because nobody's touched it in the 4 years, and you just rattle across some dirt fairgrounds to get there, right? Connection's loose somewhere. So it's totally worth your money. Go on a Monday or Tuesday. Let them know you're coming, right? I'm going to pull up on Monday. Yeah, we'll set some time aside for you, and we'll make it happen. I talked to Rich Maliki over in Maliki Parts and Services in Bayonne, and he talks about that. He has food trucks from all over New Jersey that, they set up a time, and he goes, yeah, here's your slot. We've got you slotted in from, 8 to noon. And Joe, Bob, Sue, Sally's going to be your tech. You roll up, they jump in there. These are tiny little simple machines, but that food tech's looking, connections. This is loose. And they'll come out, right? Like, this needs to be replaced. You're good here. I've tightened these up, but I can replace that now, or we could probably get another 6 months. It's your choice, right? They give you an actual real feedback, and you make a decision. And if you can't afford, like I always tell people this too, if you can't afford all of that right then, go, look, I really can only get to half of that right now. Can you tell me what is like at risk of breaking? Let's deal with that today. And then I'm going to schedule you, 6 weeks out to finish the others when I have more money. That they're not going to care. They're going to be totally fine with that, right? Instead of you at the end of it going, well, I wasn't expecting it to be 6,000. I thought it was only going to be 3,000. Like you get in that nickel dime phase and you sort of end relationships with people versus just having an actual honest conversation. And I tell these little restaurants all the time, I tell these small companies, just bite the bullet on a PM. It's like, in the end, it pays off. I know it's hard. I know it's a hard pill to swallow. It's kind of like going and getting your oil changed on your vehicle, right? Like it's $75 to do that now, right? Now, If you're smart enough, which I'm typically not, but you can do it yourself for 60, right? So you can save $15 there, and that's fine, right? Because we know the oil has to come out, the new filter goes on, new oil goes in, right? It's the basics. But here's the deal. For me, for another $15, somebody's looking in my engine bay that's been looking in engine bays for 15 years, 20 years, even 5 years, even 5 years. I can change a part on my truck because I can watch a YouTube video for it, but I'm not looking in an engine bay all day long.
Mm-hmm.
This person is, and they're going to be like, hey, I don't think you need to fix it right now, but the seal on your transmission's got a little drippy drip there. We can certainly work you in now. It's going to, like, to change the seal is going to cost you about this much, or we can schedule you late. Like, they give you options. And the cool thing is, if you have a valid PM going, a lot of times those options are much, much lower cost. Like, people are so afraid of that. When you launch a PM, they'll be like, okay, look, to do your kitchen, we're needing $2,500. And then at the end of it, you're at 9. How did I get to 9 from $2,500? And people are flipping out. Well, you haven't done anything to them in 5 years, right? So this part was like, look at it. I'm like, when I undid the bolt to pull it out and ohm it, the plastic casing disintegrated in my hands. You can't see that till you get in there, right? But the thing is, when they come back in 6 months for that $2,000 PM again, right? And I'm just throwing numbers out, right? Like, it just depends on your kitchen, but you throw that $2,000 PM. Now they're like, hey, it's gonna be about 2,700 this time. Oh, oh, we're only off by 700 this time. Like that, I can eat that this time. That's not so bad. And then the next time it's like that, right? They're always going to find a little something. That's what they're doing. That's the point of it. But here's the deal. That belt, like, the amount of people I've talked to that were like, well, we decided to get more life out of that belt. And then a week later, like, you want to talk about Murphy's Law, waiting to roll up in his Lambo and just run your day. That's it, right? Because a week later, they're like, we're down and I need a tech to get out here and blah, 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 blah. So I'll call my tech and they're like, I told them to change that belt. And I'm like, you wouldn't still happen to have that belt on there? Nope, we sold it to the customer that Tuesday. Yeah, great. What are my options? And they're like, look, I'll run down to O'Reilly's. They usually have a 17-inch belt that'll get you by, but you need to order this. So now I've called him out on emergency. I got a trip charge from him because he had to drive down to O'Reilly's to get the belt and then go to my store, right? And so I'm like, hey, you remember when he said we should change this $17 belt out? Yeah. Okay. You didn't listen, and you're out for $500 now. So case in point, right? And
right.
So, but obviously I'm very customer service oriented as well, right? So obviously you want to go in there and like slap that down on the counter and go, look, dude, like, what did I tell you? But you can't. It doesn't work that way, and it shouldn't, right? Like, I shouldn't be running in there angry about it, but it's super frustrating. And like, if you follow me on LinkedIn, that's what I had to do, that Freak Out Friday, because it's like, man, our oven's been down since Monday, and I'm like, who'd you call? Well, we forgot to. Okay. So do you want me to panic now, or should I go ahead and make those calls for you and get no help for you for the next 4 days and then panic then? Well, it's your choice. I'll scream and holler whenever you want me to. I don't care. But I'm like, why didn't you put in a ticket? Well, it's always somebody else's fault, right? Griffin was supposed to, Joe was supposed to, blah, blah. But did they? If it broke with you, don't walk away from it, right? Like, I try to instill that in these operators. They're like, well, I was afraid I'd get in trouble for breaking a machine. Was you doing something you weren't supposed to be doing? No, I just started the chicken cycle and a line appeared. So you didn't do it on purpose? No. So why am I going to scream at you? Well, our manager gets upset. Well, you need to have a backwards conversation with your manager, right? I'm doing my job. I'm using the tools you gave me. It broke, right? Sometimes they're like, yeah, well, it was the Christmas party and we decided to use the forklift. Okay. So I'm going to call that one your fault, right?
Right.
You caused that. Normal business, right? And it's funny because in data, right, you're looking at abuse, you look at neglect, you look at normal wear and tear, right? You kind of have these 3 buckets you kind of look at because you're trying to solve for a problem. But when you go to operators, right, you just call them repairs, because typically, it's very rare that you find abuse and neglect. Or sorry, it's very rare that you find like a clear-cut case of like negligence, right? Most of the time the abuse is a lack of training. Somebody showed them how to do it that way, or you've always got the one guy in every organization that's like, so the company says we should do it this way, but I'm going to show you how we do it, right? And it's like, you know, but I do like to find those people, because here's the deal: those people will find a workaround for anything, and then I can solve their problem backwards, right? So you talk about, that's another thing, getting a program to a mature level. You have to be able to, like, people want to focus on the machines. I know this machine inside and out. I've got my certification and working in it. And I'm like, yeah, who's using it? Store associates. And I'm like, have you ever talked to them? You ever watched them work? Right? You ever gone and made sandwiches with them? No. Why would I do that? I'm like, okay, you're missing one of the three, right? I said man, method, machine, right? You're an FM, so the method is yours. You own that, right? You train for it. You go to school for it. You have certifications for it. You are the expert in the method, right? Now you have to make sure that your machines and your human element are like keyed into that, right? You put something out there that the human element doesn't like, right? You got to figure out why they don't like it. Do they not like it because it's just change and they want to be those late adopter mindsets? You're going to have to deal with that, right?
Right.
You get with their management, you talk them through it. You go, look, I understand it's change. I understand everybody hates that, right? Would it help if I worked with them for an hour and showed them the benefits of this? I think it would. Cool. Let's make that happen, right? Because a lot of times, just getting people to shift from one method to another is the hardest part, right? Like, oh, I forgot. I get it. We did this 2 weeks ago, right? You had a PTO in there. You worked one day since then. You just like, you're used to walking in and doing this sequence, and it's cool, right? Here's what it caused, right? I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm not getting onto you for it, but I want you visually seeing why we made this change in the methodology, right? I'm not going to show you a bill and be like, dude, this is coming out of your bonus. I'm not wired that way, right? I need you to look at it and understand that not moving to this method is going to continue to cost you this, right? And so the big downside that, though, and this is, retailers have to watch for this, hospitals have to watch for this, schools have to watch for this, right? Because typically the people using the machines are entry-level positions and that sort of thing, right? So naturally you have a high turnover in that, right? Everybody has that starter job, but it's called a starter job because you get that foot in the door experience, right? The first chance you get at a better job, you're going to take it, and nobody faults you for it, right? Like, you start a job at minimum wage, and 6 months in, you've proven yourself, and somebody says, hey, I'm going to give you $3 more an hour to do this job over here. You're like, hey, it's been fun, guys, but I'm out. I get it, right? But in the service industry, that means our turnovers in 70s, 80% in most of our areas, and that's just nuts, right? So people are like, we sent out the training packet 18 months ago, and I'm like, what'd you do 16 months ago? What do you mean? I'm like, did you resend it? Well, no, we sent it out 18 months ago. It's there for them to follow it. And I'm like, you're not thinking like an operator, right?
Yep.
Because you sent that to people 18 months ago that have been promoted. They've gone to Wendy's, they've gone to Target, they've gone somewhere else, right? And so now you have a ton of people that have no idea what you're talking about, right? So all of that,
Yeah,
that's that machine. Yeah, it's cyclical, right? And people are
I was
like,
going to say, man, method machine. Once again.
Yeah. And people are like, oh, it's so annoying. And I'm like, dude, you signed up for this. This is our role. If it's not for you, that's cool. Bow out and do it graciously. Nobody's going to fault you for that. I have seen plenty of people a year in go, this is nuts. I want to go look at spreadsheets of financial numbers my entire life now. I'm done with this. Okay, cool. We'll grab a beer at Friday with you, and kind of shoot you on your way. It's been fun working with you. But sorry you couldn't hang out, but I get it, right? Like, I don't fault people for that. They're like, it's so like, you don't get a moment's rest. You don't get any of these things, right? And Simon Sinek, I don't know if you ever watch any of his stuff, right? But he talks about that. He goes, once you choose to be a leader, you don't really have a day off. He goes, yeah, you have Saturday or Sunday where you don't have to sit at a desk, right? But you're still a leader. Like, you shift yourself into that mindset where you are responsible for the education, forward advancement of not just yourself, but those around you. And what you'll find in a retail environment, especially a big one, the amount of people that are watching what you do, that you've taught something to them, right? Whether you realize you were teaching them something or not is huge. So then you have to start going, well, it's cool, I taught them something. I'm like, what if you taught them something bad, right? What if they saw you take a shortcut? Oh, I didn't think of that. Because here's the deal. They saw you do something that was a shortcut, and they're like, dude, that was so easy. And then they've told everybody. They're on Facebook. Dude, right? They're on Facebook with the next store over. They're on Facebook with their, Arkansas Supercenter employees. All of a sudden you caused a problem, right? And it'll never come back to you, right? But that's that. You got to think about that. So, that's a lot of times, people, they want to go into parts of Walmart. I've seen a lot of new managers do this and like, hey, you should shut that door all the time. And hey, you should be doing this and that. And I'm like, don't walk in and point out stuff they're doing wrong. Walk in and close the door and then walk off, right? Politely walk up, right? Because here's the deal. They may have left that freezer door open because they're annoyed having to open and close it all the time, but they may have also just walked out with a huge box of chicken and their hands are full, right? Don't make a scene. Close the door. Somebody saw you do that. They're like, oh, that was cool. Like, or I see them. They're coming out and they're like, hang on, let me grab you a cart. Slide it under there. And they're like, thanks, no problem. 2 seconds. You taught somebody else something right there, right? And they're looking at you. Because they do, right? Like that's a whole leadership responsibility. I walk into a store, our badges are different, right? Like I don't know, like my badge is vertical like this, right? So you walk into a Walmart store, you've seen them, right? They're landscape and they got their names a lot bigger. It's just their first name. It says Walmart and it's got smiley face and all that. It's a different badge. They know, right? They know you are not an operator. They know you're someone different, right? So a panic will set in, right? Because they're so used to, sometimes there are people that walk in and they're like, I'm here to find something wrong. I'm not. I am there. I always tell store managers this, and we always have a laugh about it at the end, because I am there to find something wrong, but that's my job. Understand, I'm not here to write tickets and send people to the Walmart naughty school and all this stuff, right? Like I'm not there. I'm here to find problems because I'm a solutions person. So I'm looking for problems so I can solve. I can't solve the problem if we don't know about it. Once we know about it, we move forward, right? And so they're like, oh, so you're not gonna. I said, yeah, no, listen, here's the deal. I'll write a report up. I'll copy you on it, right? Because I'm not gonna be like, this store is just blah, 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 blah. My reports end up looking more like, hey, this store, their tile problem is really, really, really bad. I talked to the manager. They said they've asked several times for it. We need to have somebody come in and take a look at this, right? Like this is it, I visually looked at it. Here's some pictures. It's really terrible. It sounds like, and you have to catch stuff on that on a PM too, right? You got 5,000 units. There's always one of the companies out there that's sort of half-assing your PMs, right? So that's a whole nother, right? You have to have an audit trail. You have to have all these things, right? And people get so pinned up on audit trails and store walks and stuff like that because they're like, you're trying to catch me at doing something wrong. I'm like, I'm not trying to catch you do anything wrong. I'm trying to figure out where the break is so I can fix it, right?
Yep.
I'm here to see it like you see it when you walk in. That way we're talking the same thing. My tiles are, my fryer's crap, my whatever's crap. Okay, let's look at it. Let's walk past it. Like walk me through where your pain points are, right? Sometimes we walk up to equipment and I'm like, yeah, I didn't know we bought those anymore. Yeah, we definitely need, like, I'm immediately like, yeah, I got 5 solves for you right now, and I can probably have it done within 3 weeks, right? But then sometimes, you walk into an area and I'm like, first off, I think you have a problem with this because these individuals are moving through this space in this trajectory, right? Well, they have to get to the, and I'm like, they don't have to. Like, you need to come up with another option, right? Because they're always telling you, this isn't working. I'm like, this isn't working because you keep hitting it with carts, right? So, I know you're moving through, you're busy, you guys have to move carts through here. I get it. Like, totally get it. But let's do something so that you stop hitting that with carts, right? If I have to put a baller there, fine. I hate those, but they're effective sometimes, right? But, I have to solve that problem because I'm not going to solve a 16-year-old, dragging a rocket cart down the aisle, knocking stuff off, right?
Right.
I can try, but I can't for 5,000 units. There's just, and it does no good to call it out in a meeting either, right? Like I see people call it, we found that the associates are blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why would you even put that on a slide? Well, they broke the equipment. Of course they broke the equipment. Were you using the equipment? No, I'm here in Bentonville. Exactly. So
Yep.
that slide doesn't mean anything, right? Like get that slide out of here, because sitting in a meeting and going, our associates are causing all this damage. I'm like, of course they are. They're using it, right? I had to replace tires on my daughter's car the other day, right? She put 50,000 miles on them. Like,
right.
Why did you wear those tires down? I know she's going to her job in college.
Getting point A to point B.
Right. Yeah. I gave you a car to do that, right? Tires wear out. It's annoying. It was a couple $100 worth of tires, but I wasn't mad about it. Like it's what it is. She had this is where I love the fact that she did this. She's like, hey, I think they're getting kind of old, so I go check them out. Sure enough. Yeah. They're not bald. Like there's no belt showing, right? But the little wear indicator, it's level, right? She had 10,000 miles on them, right? The one was starting to leak a little bit. She's like, I have to put air in it every so often. The guy, okay, done and done, right? Like let's avoid a breakdown incident here. Let's solve this, right? So
let's do our PM.
Yeah, exactly. And she did, right? She did. She didn't have a flat. She wasn't broke down on the side of the road. She alerted me in all due time that I could deal with it. Like I was even able to get to another paycheck to make it happen. So easy enough, right? Like easy peasy. So that's when you get a lot of these PM programs mature, that's the thing, right? Make sure the operator's involved, the operator's in the conversation, because they're the ones that deal with your consequences, right? And sometimes if you find that operator that's been in that space for 18 months, 2 years, walk them through the whole program. Go, hey, if you have 5 minutes, I want to highlight this program, and I want you to be honest with me and tell me if you think this is going to get in your way, because I'll adjust, because this needs to happen. I'm going to save you money, but if it doesn't work this way, I'll adjust, right? One of the things we used to do PMs, like we would have them go into a super center and do the PMs for all the kitchen equipment, bakery and deli, right? In a neighborhood market, that's fine. It's one space, and it's sort of like there's like a line in the middle, and the deli's this way and the bakery's this way, right? Easy enough, right? Your super center, you have an entire bakery at one end of the store and you have a deli at the other end, right? So now you split those, right? Like don't even now. Your service companies will probably go, hey, we're doing the deli Monday and we're going to do the bakery Tuesday. Got it. Cool. Right? Like easy peasy. But you have to split them sometimes, right? Because otherwise they see a guy that's disrupted their business for an entire day. Mm-hmm. And they have, right? It's for the better, but if you split it into manageable chunks, a lot of these companies, they'll be like, hey, look, we're going to start our milk run of your PMs. We've talked to the deli managers. They say they don't fire the ovens up until about 8. So our plan is to be on site by 6 a.m. and hopefully out of their hair by 8, right? Cool. Right? We've got negotiated pricing, right? They've put a little extra on the labor because they know they're either going to be there a little early or a little late to get this done. Talk through all of that, right? And on your PM stuff, right? Like I will tell you, that's another thing. I see a lot of people, they go and they're like, hey, I need a flat rate for PMs. And I'm like, you can't ask for a PM flat rate. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, I can. I'm like, nope. Yeah, you're right. You can ask for that. But here's the deal. If you ask a service company for a flat rate where it's unreasonable, they'll give you a flat rate. But I guarantee you it's 45% above what you would pay if you let them do time and labor. Mm-hmm. Scope trip, right? Where you're not hanging parts. You're just going to go out there and like look at 5 machines and confirm they're there and like confirm with the manager the timing of the PM. Yeah, you can ask for a flat rate on that, right? Like hit me. What's the flat rate for these 100 stores for you to go out and say, yes, you have this equipment there and we can like, what is that, right? I can get a flat rate because I'm not hanging parts. I'm not taking a machine down. I'm not finding stuff. But even installations have gotten so complicated. Used to we could shoot out sort of almost a flat rate or a close to flat rate for installations, right? A rotisserie installation was this much, a fryer installation was this much, but they've gotten so complicated with the machines and so many different checkouts and punch list things, right? Sometimes, yep, unplug the old one, like sweep the floor, in with the new one, boom. You can go with the flat rate with that all day long, but here's the deal. You hit one with a tile problem, you hit one with an electrical problem, you hit one, it doesn't matter, right? You hit one with any kind of problem and you have to add to it. And if you've got a flat rate, now you've sort of, the service company's pigeonholed, and they know that. They know better, right? So you're like, wait, so you were doing these last year for time and labor at an average of 2,500, but you're telling me a flat rate would be 7,000? And they're like, yep. Because they're not getting screwed on the deal. I can't blame
Right.
them.
Yeah.
So that's, you mature a program, right? You talk to your operators, you talk to your service companies. And there's a lot of times I leave a little bit of that, like free tech. I call it a little free text for the service managers. I'm like, this is what I'm thinking about doing. I've talked to the operators. This is the ideal situation. How does that look from you servicing, right? And they'll come back to you with honest answers, right? And sometimes I've had plenty come back to me and go, hey, what about the deli slicers? I mean, we're there. I'm not trying to sell you on extra, but what about them? And I'm like, well, pretty much they clean them and sharpen them, but he goes, well, we can check that they have the sharpening stones and just kind of verify that on there for you. I'm like, great, perfect. Like, awesome. Every once in a while they'd find one. They're like, hey, when we turn this one on, it walks off the table. So
right.
I can lock it out now for you because I have to. But it doesn't have to be me, but somebody's gonna need to look at this slicer. So you kind of go through that mentality as well, right? So but yeah, I mean, I love talking about that stuff, and anybody wants to find me on LinkedIn, I'm an open book on a lot of that stuff about.
That was gonna be my next question. Yeah. Give yourself a plug here. Where could people find you and reach out to you?
Yeah, the easiest place you could find me on social media right now, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Taz. Just search for Taz Sutherland. You'll see me. I've got 100 posts in there. I post every day. I got tons and tons of followers. I haven't counted lately. I stopped counting. I got to 500. I stopped counting because it felt a little arrogant, right? I'm like, I'm at 1,000 now, right? But yeah, I'm over there. Yeah, it's I'm pretty sure it's FM Taz Sutherland. So FM Taz Sutherland. And then if you go to like Facebook and search for Fed Group, right? Or on food, it's Food Equipment Digital Disruptors. If you search for that on Facebook, you'll find a group. If you're interested, you can join that group. It's open. It's an open group for anyone that wants to be in sort of the digital experience in the food equipment industry. We have service managers, service company owners, we have FMs, we have restaurateurs, we have chefs, we've got equipment manufacturers all in there. And it's Facebook, right? So it's a little bit fun. We do a lot of fun stuff. I post stuff in there. It's a little goofy and fun sometimes. But what's cool is it's even like a collective mentality of, hey, I've got this oven and I'm really struggling with it. Anybody in the group that I can contact that is better with this particular ovens? 10 minutes, somebody's going to be like, hey, we're the rep in your area for that. Let me give you a call and we'll walk you through it. All of a sudden, right before texts were having to, hey, do you know anything about this oven? No. Do you know anything about this oven? No. Like, that's what we love about that. And that's that Fed group that I'm part of, right? And so, if you're looking for me on social media, I'm there. I would like, my goal in the next year or so is to start putting some content out that could be like maybe YouTube Reels or something like that. Now that we're out of the pandemic and I can kind of get back out there and kind of do some of that stuff. I love talking about this stuff, but it's much more impactful if I give you a 1-minute video of me standing in front of an oven and going, see this? Hey, there you go. Like, let me show you. This dude right here cost you $24.98 on PartsTown. So this guy's looking at a $400 bill because when this failed, it broke this thing, right? And people start to understand that, and I'm hoping to do that soon as well. So, but yeah. Those are the two main ones.
I'll certainly have those in the show notes and make sure to link that up because I follow you and have some great content and some really entertaining posts as well. So yep. I'll certainly have those in the show notes. And yep. Like I said, Taz, certainly appreciate you coming on and love hearing your perspective on just establishing a PM, the importance there. And great content here this morning. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, definitely. And on that note, if you search for FedCon, if you find us in the group, our conference, we actually have an annual conference now. It'll be our second or third one, I think now. So it'll be in April in Arizona this time. So we're actually like that group is actually now big enough. We have our own conference, and they've got some keynote speakers. One of the keynote speakers is the drummer for Pink, the musician. So he does this like business talk, like how he made drumming a business, right? So it's a lot of really cool insight that it's nothing we deal with, right? None of us are in the music industry, right? But he talks about how he made a business out of something he loved, right? It's really like he does a really good keynote speak. So
I'll also have that plugged in the show notes as well, so people can find that.
Yep. Good deal. Yeah. Appreciate you having me on though. It's as always, it's great talking. It's great talking facilities. It's great talking to guys like you that are trying to, spread that knowledge and help the industry out for sure.
Yeah. Well, again, certainly appreciate the time. This has been awesome. And like I said, I'll have all that in the show notes. And again, certainly appreciate the insights.
Yep. Absolutely. Anytime. Have a great day, man.
Right, see you, Taz.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast. Make sure to subscribe for future episodes and visit our website, stratumcommunity.com, for more facilities management content.